My name is Alan Borst, and I'm the administrator of the Creative Writing Program at the University of Utah. It is my pleasure to welcome you to, or welcome you back, for the third of our three virtual public events that comprise our 2021 Borderlands Conference. Today, we host Fernanda Melchor, Eduardo Halfon, Cristina Rivera Garza, and Julian Herbert for a roundtable conversation. We're recording all of our Borderlands events this year, and we'll make those recordings available on our University of Utah English Department YouTube channel. Please note that we invite you to submit questions in English and Spanish via the built-in Zoom Q&A feature throughout the program. In order to post a question or view other attendees' questions during the event, you should click on the Q&A button along the bottom of your Zoom window. Before I turn things over to our Borderlands Conference organizer and host, Michael Mejia, let me take another moment to note that as a part of the Guest Writers series, the Borderlands Conference was made possible through the University of Utah's English Department and received funding from the Salt Lake County Zoo Arts and Parks Program and Utah Humanities. Utah Humanities empowers groups and individuals to improve their communities through active engagement in the humanities. This series is also supported in part by the Utah Division of Arts and Museums, with funding from the state of Utah and the National Endowment for the Arts. Thank you also to the University of Utah's Center for Latin American Studies. Let me now present Borderlands Conference organizer and host, Professor Michael Mejia.
Hello, and welcome back. Thanks, Alan, and thanks to all our readers for joining us again and for all the time that they've given us over the last couple of days. It's really been fantastic hearing them and getting questions from all of you who have been in attendance. So I really thank you for your participation and for coming back, if you're coming back, of joining us the first time, if that's the case as well. Just want to start very quickly by acknowledging that this land that where I am seated, where many of us are seated, is named for the Ute tribe and is the traditional and ancestral homeland of the Shoshone, Paiute, Goshute, and Ute tribes. The University of Utah recognizes and respects the enduring relationship that exists between many indigenous peoples and their traditional homelands. We respect the sovereign relationship between tribes, states, and the federal government, and we affirm the University of Utah's commitment to a partnership with Native nations and urban Indian communities through research, education, and community outreach activities. So I want to invite our four authors to unmute themselves and turn their cameras on. And we'll go ahead and get started. And I also just want to second Alan's call for you all out there, you lovely people in the dark, as it were, to send us questions. And we'll try to answer as many of them as we can, or sort of circulate them amongst the group. But I think the first question that I have is maybe simple, maybe not. But I just want to ask how you are and how you have been experiencing the pandemic. What, how it's affected you, your work, maybe how it's been generative in some way, and sort of thinking about what you've been working on and will be working on in the future. And this is open to all four of you.
Okay, if it's all right with you, I can be the first one to answer. Last night I was in Saltillo, in my house, in my home in Saltillo, doing the first talk with Cristina, the first event, and now I am in Mexico City, in my ex-wife's house with my as an acting single parent, because she's out, so I'm with my kid. So for us it was I want to go this way, because for us the question about how spend the time with our kid, being a divorced couple, it was very interesting how we construct this new relationship, and the the question of solidarity around family. So for me, this is the major experience, how to be a parent in this new time, in a divorced parent. And now that with Eduardo, we were talking about this question about how we relate with our kids and the school. So Leonardo now is making classes is taking classes virtually. So he spends half of the time with his mother and half of the time in Saltillo. So this new organization for me is very interesting, and I think it's the most important thing for me is how are we learning and how are we taking care of each other and I think that I don't know how, but that's the most important thing statically too, because I think this is not just a process of organization, but it's a very static process.
Julian, how old is Leonardo?
He's 11 now.
So your Leonardo is 11. My Leo is 4.
Oh,
4.5. He would correct me. 4.5.
Okay.
And if I may, I'll keep going in the parent route. For me, Michael, the natural state for me as a writer is lockdown, is confinement. I mean, it's just natural for a writer to sequester ourselves, no, and look to shut out the outside world. The problem during the past year has been, for me, a problem of concentration. Yeah. In the first part of the year, when we were in Paris and we got locked in for 2 months, I had the kid at home the entire time. No schools, no parks, no going outside. And that was really hard. That was really hard as a writer. I became a full-time parent. I stopped writing, basically. And then that ended and schools opened back up. And so France, we were lucky because schools did open quickly and they've made it a point for schools to stay open. So he's happy going to school. But then the mental part of everything that's going on, you know, the danger, the going out, the masks, that there's so much noise. There's been so much noise that it's been hard to concentrate. For me, Julian, it's been more of a matter of concentration, see, or a lack of concentration, a lack of silence, outside and inside.
Mm-hmm. Well, to continue with the with the ages of our kids, my Matthias is 22, and he came back home in March from his first year in a university that he was really liking. So we had our young guy, disgruntled, you know, kind of depressed at home, and that was not easy to see on a daily basis. We did our best though. And then what I have to say is that I do, it's been such a paradoxical time because when we have to acknowledge that people have been going through so much, we all have been going through so much, and yet I've been, you know, privileged enough. I have my job. I can teach online. I live with people that I love very much and I admire, and so we've been able to have a much closer exchange and conversations. And I'm allowed to do, the only things that I'm allowed to do are things that I already did, which, as you said, Eduardo, I write at home, and I do a lot of traveling for my for the kind of work that I do. I do research. I have to go to places, but then the only way that I'm allowed to do that is you know, on the road, which I enjoy very, very much. That's how I did it anyways. So other than that, not having to travel around, it's been such a blessing. And that has helped me with my concentration process. I think, just hopping on and off airplanes I didn't realize how not only time consuming, but concentration consuming that is. And even though this is not the best arrangement possible, I think Zoom meetings have done something important to my working life. So other than that, I've been re-acknowledging the materiality of my home. We take furniture for granted, and we call it furniture precisely because we don't pay attention to it, right? It's just the background. And being at home so close to all these different objects, it's been such a interesting way of repositioning myself in very concrete contexts. So right at the beginning of what I call the first pandemic now, the first phase of the pandemic, I had just gone to Mexico and brought back a series of documents that I wanted to work with. They were all packed in a piece of luggage, and so. Can you imagine? I'm right there, unable to travel, at home, with the documents that I needed, and pretty much chunks of time to do that. I was only teaching one class, so all these characteristics helped me to go through that, and so it's been paradoxical in that sense. It's been the worst of times and the best of times. It's been I've been very much in touch with my family, which I haven't been able to visit my parents who are aging, and yet I'm much closer to them now. I call them every day. And just that the issue of phone conversations brought back into life with such a prominence, it's been also a discovery. So these all small elements have been becoming more and more meaningful. And I guess it all will transpire in my work in future times.
I identify a lot with Cristina because I also do live with someone I really love and admire, and we've been getting closer. We even get married this year. We're super happy and with Luis Jorge, and we were just we wanted to do that. We wanted to get married before the pandemic, and when the pandemic hit, we decided to wait and then have a huge party and música norteña, all the all the todo el paquete. And what happened was that many of us realize what important it is to have a nice, stable relationship, and how it really helps to our creative life too. For us, it was very natural to be together, even in lockdown. I think we managed to get along, even if now we moved, but before we lived in an apartment that was smaller, and we got used to work in the same table because we only had one table in the dining room. So we will work in front of each other, and I just learned to ignore him, and so does he. And I was able to finish a novel this last year, and it was something that I just wasn't expecting, because my newest book, Paradise, really took me a great effort to finish. I was so distracted the whole time. In 2019, I was having this great success with hurricane season, and I got 2 awards in Germany, and we travel a lot, and I just wasn't in the mood for concentrating and working. And when I write, I like to build like a labyrinth. and get lost there many hours at a day. And while having this big social life didn't allow for that. And I don't know, I guess I'm always been an extrovert, introvert. I'm just a weird person because I enjoy being around people, and I'm very sociable, and people who know me, you know how I can be so expansive, but at the same time, I get tired really quick. So I really enjoy, even if it's a privilege, I really enjoy to be able to not socialize so much as I was doing the past few years, and also to be able to disconnect from social networking did a lot of good to my work as a writer, but also to myself, to my sanity. And it's been difficult because I also miss my friends. Most than missing my family, I think I miss my closer friends that they live here in Puebla in the same city, and I cannot see them. It is just so painful, and I try to be present. I'm sort of a not. I always felt that I'm not such a good friend because sometimes I'm just, like trapped inside my own head to worry a lot about my friends. But this year and the last year, I've been trying to make an effort to connect with my friends. Before we just, I don't know, we went for grab a beer and have a cup of coffee and we will catch on. But now I have to make an effort to be, and lots of friends have been having lots of health troubles, personal troubles. So I've been trying to be there for them, even if I cannot be physical with them.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, I'm thinking about what Christina said, and I think I feel as a professor at the university as well, a lot of the same kinds of. I'm very aware of the same kind of privileges that you were talking about of as well as sort of living with someone I love, and that this is a very in a sense easy sort of thing to tolerate in some ways. But I'm also sort of thinking about the ways in which all of your work is so in tune with observing inequities that result in, both mundane and very terrible violences, right? And it seems to me like the pandemic, not just here in just sort of looking around us here in the US, but seeing the ways in which some of you all were talking about before we got on here, the situations in Mexico and Guatemala as well, and sort of the ways in which the pandemic has intensified those inequities, or in some cases, made them impossible to ignore, right? It sort of really highlighted the nature of these and how people, the way in which people are experiencing these every day. And so I guess I'm just sort of curious, given the fact that your work is so attuned to observing and talking about these things, what your experience of the pandemic has done to sort of intensify those awarenesses, or I don't know, so it simply sort of confirmed what you already knew, perhaps.
Well, there is something that I'm always very concerned about. I pay a lot of attention to is the embodied nature of writing. All that attention to materiality has been always there. And it seems to me that in this context with the pandemic, that's a condition that I'm sharing more and more with more people, more dwellers of the earth, right? So as you mentioned, and there are issues that sometimes we can neglect, we can overlook just in our daily lives, like the very fact that we have bodies, right? And that we have hands. And I remember during the first pandemic, there was much talk about the possibility of contagion based on touching. And I remember thinking, oh, wow, now we have to pay attention to, where our hands are placed, whose hands were placed there before we did. And I'm talking about, people and commodities too. So just enhancing the sense of touching might have increased our awareness about how things are made, labor processes that are involved, and that obviously involve very unequal power relations. Colonial linkages just transversing the world and things like that. So it seems to me that a kind of vision that was very much inbuilt in whatever I did was now being enacted, was that placed on public view. It was a matter of public conversation. And I thought that was not only interesting, but crucial at this moment. So there is a way in which all these growing inequalities might overcome us and kind of numb us and paralyze. They might even paralyze us. But at the same time, it seems to me that the pandemic and now what we've seen in Texas, all this
Yes.
climate change unleashed, there is that possibility of the quickly developing a very a critical sense that I think it's not that it was not there, but perhaps it's one of those dormant issues that suddenly come back into view, and they are inescapable now. So I'm optimistic this morning. I'm usually not this optimistic, I have to admit, but it seems to me that there are possibilities here, cracks in between all these overwhelming facts that might help us, find alternative ways of coming together. And I think Julian mentioned the issue of care, for example, I think is paramount now. And it's very much in our minds. So they might not appear as momentous, groundbreaking issues, but they are building little by little. And I think that at least in my case, it has a lot to do, touches very closely the way in which I work with writing, the way in which I think writing does its job in the world.
I want to take some of the thing Cristina said, because for me the big irony is that how pandemic shows us is the big fiction that globalization is, because I think the government responses, the differences, huge differences between social statements, social classes, etc. It's we lived a very different pandemic in different cities, in different stratification of in the society. So for me, this is a time to say, for me, this is a good time to say, I don't know and I don't understand. For me, this is the most important experience too, along with the question of family care, solidarity, is I don't know and I don't understand what is happening, because I found a very surprising this attitude of many philosophers that came with a book that it looks like they were thinking in pandemics since 2 years ago, so they have the book ready to be published. So and it was, I don't know how they get there so quickly, and of course they were wrong. We now know they were wrong, and that's for me is something that I share with that kind of people. That is that this egocentric vision of my own intellect, and so for me this is the big learning is I have to slow down and shut up and listen a little more, and also when Cristina was talking about the furniture and the things at your house, for one of my experiences poetically practice it is to fix stuff. You know, now I have a toolbox, no sé, una caja de herramientas, a tool, and now I have the screwdriver and the hammer, and I go and I never did that before, and that's a great learning for me. My younger brother, he's a handyman, so he teaches me sometimes in person, sometimes at the phone, but and I'm always doing it so badly, and that's a learning too, but my capacity to solve practical things every day, and that's translated to the craft of the writing. For me is to, I'm not working. I was writing a lot of I was writing a novel, for example, and I stopped many of that things, and I'm writing two kind of stuff now. I'm working on scripts, for two scripts for movies, because I need to work, because I am a craftsman, and I need money to for my family, and because I love to write. I'm writing poems because I think this is a time when the only thing that matters really to write are poems.
Wow. I think what I've been thinking a lot in my mind this whole this past year, and I, well, maybe you don't know it, but in my last relationship, I raised a girl from a 6-year-old when I met her, and then I left when she was 12 years old. The relationship ended, and it ended in not so good terms. So I've been seeing Hannah, my stepdaughter, not enough. And then this last year, my ex, he went to live to Michigan. So these past years, I haven't seen her, and we just write emails to each other. And I'm really proud who she's become. Now she's 15, and you know, she's writing, and she writes this sort of comic, video game, fan fiction scripts. I don't know. It's amazing. She's I think she's great, and she'll be a great writer someday if she puts herself into it. But I was thinking a lot in children this past year, maybe because I miss her, and I've been used to raising her, and I don't know. I sometimes think in my colleagues and my friends' children, and I think I go back to my own childhood, and I think that I don't know what I would have done if I was a child during this pandemic, because sincerely, my family was a mess, and I came from a dysfunctional family, and my parents' dynamic was really, really bad. And for me, school and extracurricular activities were a refugee. And I don't know, I sometimes think about all these children that are, you know, in lockdown, and whose parents have to work anyway, so they will be left or alone, or with, I don't know, in Mexico with a grandmother or an aunt, or maybe somebody who will get paid to raise them. I don't know. I just think that the real truth story of the pandemic will be told years after this, and it will be told by the children who had the children, for example, who this year they had to begin school and they couldn't, and I just think that there are lots of children who are really lucky to have parents that are involved, like you, Julian, or you, Eduardo, And I don't know, I think that there's lots of children who won't be able, and I just empathize a lot with that. And I think that's one of the big inequities of this time.
Yeah, I agree with Fernanda completely. I hadn't thought of it, Fernanda, in terms of children. That's really, really well put, really interesting. I always think, Michael, when I think of trauma, yeah, whether that trauma be the Holocaust or the genocide of the indigenous people in Guatemala, or this is a trauma that we are living in a sense. And the only way literature can face trauma, in my opinion, is from afar. It takes distance, time, and physical distance as well. So when we're in it right now. It's you see it, you see the inequity, you see them more because they're more stark. The differences, the poverty of our poor countries, no, or the difference between rich countries and poor countries in getting the vaccine, for example. You see all of these differences more, but that's not literature. So I think it's very interesting, Julian, that you're writing poetry now, because it is an emotional state that we're in. I think the writers who can function really well within a trauma are the journalists, because they are reporting on it. Yeah, you're writing what you see. But in my case, I really need a lot of distance, objectivity, to write about my grandfather's kidnapping in the 1960s in Guatemala by the guerrilla. I needed that distance. You know, it was the third generation, a generation removed, who could go back and look at it because I never lived it. Or my other grandfather's experience in Germany, in the concentration camps. I'm so far removed that I can write about that. I can see it in aesthetic terms. But right now, while we're in it, it's going to take a generation. I absolutely agree with Fernanda. And it's going to be their point of view and their perspective and their visceral reaction to what they're going through right now. They don't even know it, but they're becoming writers as they live through this.
So they're all fantastic answers, and they touch on some other things that I've been thinking about with respect to all of your work, and I'm thinking maybe we want to pick up on this idea of the journalist, right? The journalist as a perspective, as an individual who is capable of, or maybe the most capable in Eduardo's way of saying that of operating and observing within trauma. And so what I'm interested in is like that journalistic aspect, perhaps the historical aspect within, that seems to operate in all of your work in some sense, right? All four of you. I mean, that I was thinking about this particularly in the reading earlier today, Eduardo, like the quality of like the fact that, you know, the sort of the record of facts, and that voice within the piece that you were reading. And Fernanda, I mean, that, you know, this idea of sort of approaching that initial story for hurricane season as a journalist, right? And then to sort of, you know, recognizing that that was not the safest thing to do at that moment. And so I am sort of interested in the ways in which, you know, the fluidity of genre within your prose, and the ways in which, you know, the nonfiction blends with fiction, and I sort of think about this maybe as related to the genre of Crónica, right? That is that you're all, you know, that it sort of exists in Mexico and in Latin America in ways that it doesn't here. So anyway, I'm just sort of interested in to hear you all talk about the journalistic sort of aspect of your work.
Who's been a journalist here? Who can go first?
I think it's my turn, because
it is.
That's what I've studied, journalism, and it's. I really like in Anglophone countries how what we call Crónica is more attuned to what's called personal essay. Because I always felt that when I was writing Crónica, I was more likely writing personal essays. What we think of essays in Mexico, it's sometimes like an academic essay, like you have to quote sources and you have to have this, you know, this highbrow and solemn tone. And I don't know, I didn't think that essay and Crónica and journalism until I began writing. I went towards it because I never worked as a journalist. I've always, as a reporter, I was always writing crónicas and these personal essays, nonfiction, as a freelancer. I always choose subjects that interest me and in which I was curious about because of me. I never had an editor asking me to do research about some other things. So for me, it's always a matter of personal involvement. I want to tell a story that has something to do with me, but not because I want to be a protagonist or a character inside the story, but mostly because it has a relationship, an emotional relationship to me. So I devoted my first book of essay talking about Veracruz, the land where I was born, this port of the Gulf of Mexico. That for me it was very interesting to write about the city where I am from and to try to be at the same time as objective as subjective as I could be, talking about the city where I was born. And I don't know, at the same time, there is limits of what can be told from a journalistic perspective. I mean, when I was trying to write Hurricane Season at first, I thought that I could do this nonfiction novel, like in cold blood. I was very interested in doing research, but I soon find out that it was very difficult to do it because I didn't have any financial resources. I didn't have any credentials. And it was so dangerous to travel to those rural areas of Veracruz back at 2015. So I decided to use fiction to do another kind of research. So for me, it is pretty much, I don't know, I've been for a while, I've been a gender Nazi, and I don't know why, because I mix it all together in my first book. And then I begin to relax a little bit and to think that what interested in literature is what a particular work has of unique. And sometimes this uniqueness comes from the mix of genders and it's mestizaje, it's amalgam of elements coming from different parts.
You know, I came to use documents and other kinds of materials, not as a journalist, certainly, as a writer. And to me, that involves, as Fernanda said, it has to involve a very personal interest and perspective. But as a writer who had been trained in history and who have been I just fell in love with archives too, and what archives can offer to us. I've been very much interested in how experience is layered, and how writing might afford me the possibility of excavating, of going through different layers in such a way that I might be able to denaturalize issues or phenomena that might appear as as natural, as they belong there. And I think critical writing, if nothing else, allow us to see how things might have been different, how they are in fact different, and how they might become different in the future. I've been calling this kind of writing geological writing lately, because I become increasingly interested in issues related to territories, the relationship between territories and bodies. In Autobiografía del Algodón, that's precisely what I wanted to do. It's a somehow post-anthropocentric autobiography that is not centered in the I. And because of the materials that I had access to, or I was trying to gather, and in following them very closely, in nourishing a personal relationship with all these different materials, well, then my writing had to follow that. And you know, very often, quite often, I should say, writing doesn't develop along genre lines. So transgressing and breaking and finding the form, constructing the form with the documents is something that I believe writing does, right? In a way of telling stories or sharing experiences more specifically. I've been I'm very interested in the aesthetic and political value of disappropriation instead of appropriation. I think literature with a capital L is been very much based on a range of appropriation techniques. And my relationship with documents and other kinds of materials, as I said, are very much grounded in a sense of what I call a shorthand is disappropriation, right? The obvious acknowledgement of other perspectives and writings that are participating in the way in which I end up with a text that I claim as mine and that I sign as mine, right? And so I'm very much working with processes of unlayering, unearthing, and that involves obviously the presence, the practice, the experience of many others. And to me, that's an aesthetic reckoning, and at the same time is a political way of going through writing. And I'm not talking about ideologies in here. I'm talking about perspectives that might allow me to excavate, to look at how these experiences have positioning themselves in such a way that they might appear as natural. And if we are in disagreement with the world in which we live in, and certainly I am, my interest always is to look for that Achilles tendon, right? For that aspect, that crack that might allow to twist the world in my relationship to specific issues, and with some luck to create you know, just the kind of relationship that the kind of experience that I've had as a result of reading some books is that you know, that they have changed me. They have changed the way in which I live and I react. And so even the mere possibility of the possibility of contributing to something like that, I think that keeps me going too.
Yes. Well, I want to say that for me, journalism is a love of youth, because I do work as a journalist, but very, very young, between 17 and 22 years old. So it was, I worked in two local magazines in Saltillo. It was very lousy work to do. And the first prose text that I published was when I was 21 years old, an investigation, a reportage about Altos Hornos de Mexico, that is a very big industry in Monclova, Coahuila. And I left that kind of work to go to a very different place, that is teaching Cervantes at the university. So it was for me a very interesting mix. But also what I think is I'm very interested in rhetorics in general, and in periodistic or journalist genre for me are very, I don't know how to say it. I learn a lot for not just the practice, but the study of the genre. And I think rhetorics are very important if you look at them as a young punk, because I think you have to write against the stream. And when I'm thinking in using the techniques of journalism, I think always they will work if you use it in the wrong way. For example, in Tom Song, when I was, this is an autobiographical novel, but for me, the technique, it was like making a profile. This kind of work of profiling a character, and for me, it was, I'm gonna make a profile of my mother. So for me, it's more than an autobiographic novel, and it's this kind of practice. And then in the House of the Pain of Others, that is a historical investigation. I work it in the other direction, like a reportage, like trying to not the structure of an academic text, but the fact-checking process. And in Bring Me the Head of Quentin Tarantino, I have this amazing story that my younger brother told me. It's narrated in The Roman Wedding, that is a narco lord that is dead, and he's like dividing his empire, small empire. And this is a story that happens to my younger brother, because his father was this character. So for me to take distance, I think I have to apply techniques that came from other direction, from journalism. And so I try to use like a collage of techniques of cinematographic scripts. And now I wrote this, my last book is Ahora Imagino Cosas. It's a collection of crónicas. And to do that, because someone says, I took a lot of years to write Bring Me the Head of Quentin Tarantino, and some reviewer wrote, it looks like he wrote it very quickly for the editor. That book took me 10 years to do it. But I think, what if I did that? What if I do that for my next book? So I decided to do it along with my editor, with Andres Ramirez, and I have a deadline to give him each one of the crónicas, because we wanted to put the heat of journalism, even though there are no journalist texts.
Mm-hmm.
For me, I have no respect for genre. None. I don't know where that comes from, Michael. I'm completely at the service of the story I'm writing. So if that story requires investigation, I will investigate. If it requires interviewing, I will interview. If it requires, as most cases, going back to my childhood to look for things or to create episodes, I will do that. So each story will tell me what parts it needs or what it needs to feed from and when. In the piece I read earlier today, obviously there is a lot of historical investigation. It deals with the Guatemalan Civil War as a backdrop. The drama is something else. The staging is that backdrop. So I needed to do that. That said, now I'm going to say something a little naughty and perhaps controversial for the setting we are in. I believe all writing is fiction. You can call it nonfiction, you can call it metafiction, you can call it autofiction, you can call it memoir, you can call it whatever you want. In the end, it is fiction, what we're doing when we write. Even if you want to label it as nonfiction, really, just in deciding what I include and when to include it and what to exclude, there is a fictional process going on there.
Absolutely.
No? So,
Yeah.
so I like the word crónica. I'll go back to that word, which, and I'm the only non-Mexican here, so I'm going to quote a Mexican so that I can feel a little more Mexicano. A Villoro, no? Villoro's famous ornitorrinco de la literatura. The platypus of literature is the crónica. It's got the beak of a duck and the tail of you know, it's just a blend, una amalgama, decía Fernanda, of different genres. It's a type of writing that in some cultures is very difficult to understand. And I think the American culture is one of them, where everything has to be categorized. For us as Latin Americans, I don't think that's the case. I think we just take writing as writing and read it and enjoy it. And we don't have this compartmental mentality. Anyways. Hope it wasn't too controversial.
Just to support what you just said, I really think that, and I'm not the first one saying this, of course, but if we deal with memory, and I think in many cases that's what we are, if we deal with language, we're dealing with memory, and if we're dealing with memory, we're dealing with fiction. There is no way out of that, right? And I'm at peace with that. So it's just a matter of degree, right? How much closer or not I am to specific documents, and even reading documents. I mean, there's interpretation there, and there is creativity, there is imagination. So I don't believe either in that the big divide that sometimes critics create between works of imagination and works of what? Lack of imagination. It's just mind-blowing to me sometimes.
Yeah, I think Eduardo, your comment about the crónica and the sort of the as being a kind of Latin American form that is, you know, I mean, there's definitely something that I was sensing, and so I was curious to see if that was true, because it does seem to me like the fluidity that I'm talking about. It's not an experiment, right? I mean, it's just sort of, this is a very natural approach in some sense to the kind of narratives that you all are writing. I want to flip over quickly here to some questions that we've got coming in. And one is from my colleague, Kate Coles, asking if she's wondering if you can expand a little on the question of why poetry becomes so urgent in moments of crisis. And I think this is sort of responding to what you said earlier, Julian. And she says, I would expand this perhaps to include lyric that comes in sentences as well as lyric that comes in lines.
Yes, well, let me see if I can translate my experience, because it's this question about the difficulty of language, because when I'm gonna say it with an example. When Leonardo, my younger child, was born, when he began to learn how to talk, I stopped writing poetry, because the mechanism and the pleasure and the anxiety of that kind of language, I was living it in the process of he learning the Spanish language. So when he began to speak to me like a little adult, I began to write poetry again. So for me, this is the kind of experience that poetry brings to my daily experience, that I need to don't understand what I'm doing, and at the same time to have some kind of tools to go through the. I said one time, I say that you're in a poem, you're not a writer, you're more like a pilot. You know, you know where the tools are, but you're not quite sure at this velocity. Everything's the intelligence and the knowledge becomes very is instinctive. So I think this is how, for me, this is how this time in any crisis, poetry can because it's you have to go very naked to the question. You cannot intellectualize a lot, but at the same time there is a technique. It's like when you improvise in jazz, there's a technique. You are not using it in a conscious way, but you are using it. And yes, that's the question for me. Everything is in the year.
If I may, that's wonderful, Julian. And yesterday I decided to read poetry because that's what I've been writing. Yes. So we didn't talk about that, Julian, and I was doing it.
Yes.
And it seems to me, I very much like the definition that Lynn Heginian has for poetry. Well, it's not a definition, an intimation, more likely. Poetry being the language with which we investigate language, for example. And I think this is a moment very rich for that precisely. I just finished a book recently, a book organized along paragraphs. And then I just felt the need to jump into something totally different. I've been using some of the strategies, the writing strategies that I've been adept to lately, excavating, quoting, collaging, that kind of work, but in something that I feel more comfortable calling poetry rather than fiction or prose. In the question, there was that issue. It's not only because it's not only because verses are used. It's a matter of how the sentence is worked with. It's how the lyric becomes a component, an important, inevitable component of the whole process. And to me, that language investigating language captures the whole scene. So I guess at this specific moment, after finishing that work, right now is that period in which I agree, everything is just up for grabs. We have very limited understanding of what is going on, and we need time. And for that precise moment, I think that kind of very close investigation is what feels right. Right now, not that the same kind of care doesn't go into the other kind of works. I mean, I think fiction writers have to pay very close attention to how diction and how sentences are built and all the kinds of behaviors that we attach to poets. But I think we all have to deal with that if we want to write good books, in any case. And so, but this is the moment, and I feel it deep in my bones. This is what felt absolutely right. Yeah.
We're at time. I'm wondering if we have if we can take on one more question. Everybody's cool with that. We got Ricky here, who's says, I'm curious to hear your thoughts on the Quranic literary form. Okay, sort of touched on that, which he sees as critical disruptions of characterizations of regions such as Tamaulipas and Veracruz. But yeah, let's maybe take on the part two here. The question about how ghosts or apparitions play a role in memory and placemaking in your texts. Which, yeah, I love. I mean, I'm sort of thinking about actually maybe a little bit earlier, Fernanda, that question of or the comment that you had hearing voices, right? That and how that was important. And I was thinking about Christina's sort of consistent use of the line, what country are we in, Agrippina, throughout Grieven, and sort of the presence of Juan Rulfo, right? I mean, and the work, and so yeah, I am sort of curious about maybe we could use that as a way to sort of address Ricky's question of ghosts and apparitions playing a role in memory and placemaking in the work that you all do.
I think, well, I hadn't realized until this last novel I wrote, Paradise, but in my novels there is always a pregnant woman and an haunted house, and there are just symbols that I never thought that I will be using so much. I don't know. It's just it made me realize that. How for so long I've been working with a lot of instinct and intuitivity in my work, and I don't know. I guess ghost stories for me or supernatural elements are not just a way to capture the reality of the spiritual beliefs of the place where I was born, like Veracruz, where there's this super interesting mix of Catolicismo and Santeria and sorcery and African religious belief brought by slavery and indigenous also practices, and in this sort of carnivalized and pop fashion that is very particular, but also because I think legends and myths are of course symbols of and can be used as symbol in fiction. So I don't know. For example, in my last book, it's a story that tells. I mean, there are two landscapes, luxury residentially and a small town invaded by narcos, and in the middle there's this haunted house where a bloody countess used to live, and I wanted to use that as a symbol of misogyny, how misogyny it is not so much the despising of women, but also the mongering fear of women. So I try to use this character as a symbol. For example, I think we've been using that as a symbol without society even notice that. It's just unconscious, I think.
I just very briefly again. Recently, I was reading this wonderful book by Christina Sharp, In the Wake, on Blackness and Being, and it was one of those marvelous reading experiences. And one of the things that she said, and I believed that she says it in such a way that makes me think that that it hadn't been thought before. The past is never the past, right? That we are continuously facing these reverberations of experience, pretty much as Eduardo was referring earlier to as trauma, right? And there was something that a concept that she was working with, which is residence time, the time that takes for some elements, some materialities to dissolve on Earth, the kind of time, the time that they live, that they stay on Earth, not as a metaphor, but as a materiality as such. And she was specifically referring to the ocean and not to the Earth. But then I was thinking that that's precisely what I am usually very attracted to, very intrigued by, that residence time of experience. And it's not necessarily a ghost in the sense that we think of ghost as something immaterial. It's not the immateriality of ghosts that I'm concerned about, but just the opposite. It's very materiality. The fact that the past is never the past. The fact that that we are in this living in this multi-layer present, and that I see writing as working very closely with. So I'm, and I guess that's the reason I mentioned the word apparition instead of ghost in both in Autobiografía del Algodón and in my earlier book, Había mucha neblina, humo no sé qué, about Juan Rulfo, because I really believe that they are with us, that the past is with us, that is being transfigured, that it has many ways of picking through these different layers and looks at us, grabbing us very often. And since I also think of writing as a practice, a material practice, it's not something that I do with my mind. It's something that I'm working with my entire being, my whole body. So this is the work of creating a space for that encounter of materialities that are never in the past, that we are surrounded by. And just, I think books have helped me. They've been these kind of magnifying glasses that have helped me to pay attention to see things that otherwise I might have neglected. And I like to see my work as contributing also to that process. And just to answer the specific question, yes, it has a lot to do with place. It has a lot to do with territory. We are bodies bound to territories. We belong to, as Jose Revueltas would say, that's our first responsibility. We have a body, we have a location on earth. And that is a sign of belonging, and belonging involves belonging has consequences. And those consequences are aesthetic, of course. And I go back to that charged word, and they are political in the sense, not in the ideological sense, but in the sense that that triggers very important questions as to why are we here, who was here before myself, and what kind of process allowed that to happen.
If I may, I want to add just a little question. Eduardo was saying before that for Latin Americans, there's no this clear distinction in between gender, etc. And I think that applies to our feeling, or at least in this, I think in this roundtable, it could be said that there are no clear difference between natural and supernatural. I think that is very important for the Latin American culture, because the question is not like there's a deity with hundreds of heads, and no, there's a woman in a white dress weeping along the river, and so that could be happening in this moment, or it can be a ghost from 2 centuries ago. And that gap is very important to I think to see how the spectral world has haunted the Latin American literature.
Yeah, I agree. I agree with Julian, especially. The ghost question was a little out of my element. but if you see it that way, Julian, I think you're absolutely right. It's bizarre that we're still read as Latin Americans, especially in outside of Latin America. Only, I would say, outside of Latin America, Spain especially, as magical realism. I have no idea why. For us, it's all the same. It's all part of life. So that makes sense to me. The no differentiation between what I see and and the magic behind it. It's all part of what I see. You know?
Thank you all so much. I think I would love to go on talking about all of these things and more. But I think we'll have to end here, as I know everybody has other places to be. But I just want to say again, thank you all so much for taking the time to spend with us and for displaying. I keep coming back to Julian's term solidarity, displaying for us this really sort of beautiful solidarity that you all share, and modeling that for us and sharing it with us and including us in it for this time. So thank you again, and thank you all who've been attending, and hope to see you again soon.
Thank you, Michael.
Thank you.
Michael.
It's wonderful
Thank
seeing
you,
all
guys.
of you.
Abrazos a todos.
Abrazos,
Nos vemos pronto.
abrazos.
Abrazos a
Gracias.
todos.
Bye.
Chao.